What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Paddock, and today we are going to talk about how to memorize a song. One of the questions that I'm asked most often on Instagram and YouTube is, how do I memorize a song? How do I memorize music? Is there any easy way to do it, or do I just play the song 1,000 times and then I'll remember it? And the answer is yes, there are several strategies that you can use that will make memorizing music easier. So today we're going to talk about a few of those. Now, when it comes to memorizing music, the very first thing that has to happen is you need to know the song really, really well. So you need to listen to it tons of times, 15, 20 times, if not more than that. If you have sheet music for it, play the music a bunch of times, 15, 20, 30 times, play it a whole bunch of times. Once you've got that down, then you're ready to implement some of these strategies that will make remembering the song way easier. So before we dive into the strategies of memorizing music, first I want to talk about note movement, the movement that the notes make. There are 4 basic movements, and if you understand these movements, it'll make life way easier when it comes to memorizing music and just hearing the patterns in general. So the first is scale-wise motion. This is by far the most common, meaning that the notes are just moving in the order of the scale that you're in. The second is neighbor tones. Neighbor tones are when you play a note, the note up, and then back to the note. So if you're in the key of G, that'd be G, A, G. Or a neighbor tone down would be G, F sharp, G. So it's the note, a down a note, and note. Of course, these are in the key of G. These would switch for whatever key you're in. And sometimes there will be half steps instead of whole steps. It just depends on the key and the song. The third movement is passing tones. Passing tones are similar to scale-wise motion. I just think about them as smaller movements. So if I was going to do a passing tone between B and G, I would just put an A in there. So it'd be B, A, G. And in that example, the A, that note right there is the passing tone, because you're passing between it between your 2 main notes, which are B and G. If I was going from C to G, B and A would be your passing tones. And if I was going from B to G and I was doing it chromatically, the B flat, the A, and the G sharp would be your passing tones. So passing tones are just the notes between the 2 end notes, meaning the one in the beginning and the one at the end. And the fourth movement is one of the absolute most important movements, and that is chord tones. So jumping by chord tones. So that would be your 1, 3, 5, and 7. So in the key of G, that would be G, B, D, and F sharp. When you're trying to memorize a song and you hear that the notes jump, in other words, they are not doing scale-wise motion, there's a very high probability that the note they are jumping to is a chord tone. Now that's not a 100% of the time rule, but it's a good 50 or 60% of the time. So if you know your chord tones, it's going to make figuring out these jumps and remembering these jumps way easier. Okay, so we have 4 basic movements. We have scale-wise motion, neighbor tone, passing tone, and chord tone. Now those aren't the only movements, but those are your 4 most common. And if you understand those, it's going to make your life way easier when it comes to memorizing the music. Okay, so the song that we are going to talk about today when it comes to memorizing music is Bye Bye Blackbird. And I am choosing this song specifically because it follows a lot of the rules that I want to talk about. And it's going to be a building block for when you start to memorize more songs. This one's a fairly easy one to memorize because of the pattern of notes. So what I just said there is pattern of notes. That's what you really need to pay attention to when it comes to memorizing music. Most music is based off of some kind of pattern or some kind of theme. So if you can pick up on that pattern or that theme, memorizing the music becomes way easier because it becomes more predictable and you can kind of figure out what's going to come next if you understand what the pattern or theme of the music is. So the very first thing we're going to do when we look at this piece of music is look and see what key we're in. And Bye Bye Blackbird, we are in the key of D. That is super important because that narrows down the notes that we have to remember. The likely notes. We might have 1 or 2 accidentals here or there, but for the most part, we know that we're going to be in the key of D major, which is D to D with an F sharp and a C sharp. And we know that our chord tones are going to be the 1, 3, 5, and 7 of D major, which are D, F sharp, A, and C sharp. And when it comes to melodies, your 1, 3, and 5 are your most common. Your 7 isn't quite as common, although it is there some. But your 1, 3, 5 and your scale chord and your scale tones are super important to learning how to memorize any song. Okay, so let's take a quick look at Bye Bye Blackbird. It is in the key of D, and it starts on the 3rd, which is the F sharp. And if you notice, this song has a lot of repeated notes. I picked this song because it has a lot of repeated notes. I want to pick something that's fairly easy to memorize and that has a pretty strong melodic sound to it. So let's just play this first line and take a listen to it. Okay, so let's look at this first line. If we take the G out, all it is a D scale starting on the 3rd. So you play the 3rd, the 2nd, and then the 1st. So you are playing scale-wise motion, or you can even think of it as passing tones between the 3rd and the 1st. So if I were looking at this, I would know that I was starting on the 3rd, I go up a neighbor tone, and then I go down the scale. And then the scale-wise motion continues. You go to the D, up to the E, back down to the D, and land on the C sharp. So if you know that the song starts on the 3rd and it's almost all scale-wise motion, meaning moving in the direction of your major scale, either up or down, except it has that one neighbor tone, the first part of the song is super easy to memorize. Now, if we look at the next 8 measures, let's take a listen to it. That sounds super familiar. It sounds super familiar because it's the exact same thing. Music has patterns that repeat over and over and over. So your second 8 measures are the exact same as your first 8 measures, except it starts 1 scale degree up. So the first one starts on your F sharp, which is the 3rd. The second 8 measures starts on your G, which is the 4th degree of your major scale. So it starts on the 4th, and it works the same scale pattern. So we are using scale-wise motion, and we are paying attention to the patterns that are going on. Now, if you hear me play this, I'm playing the bare bones version of it, which is kind of the real book version of it. If I were to perform this song, I would ad lib on it and make it sound way cooler. Now, when I go to memorize, I wouldn't try to memorize what I just played because I probably would never play it like that again. That's the ad-libbed version. I would memorize the bare bones version of what is the direction of the notes? What is the direction of the pattern? What's going on with the pattern? What note does it start on? What note does it go down to? Once I figure all that stuff out and I can play the bare bones version and I'm really comfortable with that, throwing in ad-libbing on it should be pretty easy. Okay, so now let's talk about the 4th line. So we start on the root. It starts on the D. So it starts on the 1 and it jumps to the 5th. That is a super, super duper common interval. When you hear a jump, oftentimes it's going to be a 3rd or a 5th. In this case, it is a 5th. So we go 1 to 5. A is your 5, 1 to 5. Again, I told you when there's a jump, there's a very high probability it's going to be a chord tone. And this one it is. It goes 1 to 5, and then it walks down the scale. So it walks down the scale to the 2nd degree. So you go 1, 5, walk down the scale to the 2nd degree. Again, none of these notes are random. They all have like an order to them that makes sense once you start paying attention to how the notes all go together instead of looking at them as individual notes. Now, the last note of that line is a D sharp. Where does the D sharp come from? There's no D sharp in the key of D. So that is the note that makes this song Bye Bye Blackbird. Almost every song that you play is going to have like a note that doesn't fit the pattern. It's like, what is that note doing there? It doesn't really belong. That's what makes it this song. Now, if you also are comfortable reading chord symbols, you'll see that that D sharp hits on a B7, which the notes are B, D sharp, F sharp, and A. So if you're going to play a D, a type of D over that chord, it has to be a D sharp. But even if you're not reading the chord symbols, that is the note that makes the song sound different. This is what it would sound like with a D natural. Doesn't sound good. Doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound any different. It just kind of sounds boring. Surprise! There's a surprise note. So you have to remember that your D sharp is a surprise note. So that line goes 1, 5, walk down the scale, and then hit that D sharp. Then that next line continues the pattern, although the first interval is a B to a G, which is a minor sixth. Keeps you in the key of D, but it's not a fifth. But if you look at it, the pattern just kind of goes down a step. The first one went up to an A and walked its way down. The next one goes up to a G and walks its way down. And even though that C sharp is in the key of D, it also sounds like that surprise note, but it's more of a resolution surprise note. Like the note resolves, but it's still that half step from the D. From there, we play the same line that we played in the first 4 measures, except instead of going to a D this time, we go back to the D sharp. So we're going to keep that surprise note in there. So what is the function of the D sharp there? There, since the D sharp has already been played, it really doesn't feel like that big of a surprise. But to me, it sets up the ending. It's like, oh, we're not doing the same thing. I can feel the ending coming on now. Oh, here's the ending. So that D sharp sets up the ending. When I hear that D sharp, I can hear that the end is coming. Now, if you look at the chords of the end of this song, it's a 2-5-1. And if you look at the notes in the melody, they are chord tones for the 2-5-1. E, G, which are your 1, 3 in the key of E minor, and then G holds through in the A, 7, which is your 7 to 3. And then it lands on the 1. And to me, it just sounds like when I'm playing this, it just sounds like they're surrounding the D. So the C sharp is acting more as an approach note than it is on its own. Like you go from the G, but that C sharp just makes it sound more finished. So when you look at these notes as patterns and how they all go together and how none of them are random, it makes it way easier to memorize. So if you were trying to memorize a sentence, you wouldn't try to memorize each letter and each word. You would look at how the words go together. That's what you need to do to make memorizing easier when it comes to music, is look and see how the notes go together. Find that pattern. There's almost always going to be some kind of pattern, and pay really close attention to the movement of the notes. Are they going in scale-wise motion? Are they doing neighbor tones? Are they doing passing tones? Are you jumping? If you're jumping, are you jumping to chord tones? Once you start paying attention to that and plugging in your key signature to it, it's going to make memorizing these tunes way easier. Now, again, in almost every song, there's going to be something that's a little weird. It's like, why is that there? In this song, it's the D sharp. Why is the D sharp there? So when it comes to memorizing Bye Bye Blackbird, you just have to remember, oh, there's that D sharp that sticks out. That's what makes it Bye Bye Blackbird. So when you look for the pattern and the movement of the notes and plug in the scale, it makes it way easier to memorize songs. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. And if you now feel way more confident in memorizing songs, I'd really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and leave me a comment. Thanks a lot.